Hey guys, welcome back to the UNCOMMODiFiED podcast and to another unpeddling conversation that Chris and I are going to co-host today. I want to welcome to the show our guest today. It's Lisa Genovese. How are you, Lisa?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Excellent. Listen, I want to introduce you guys to Lisa. Let me tell you a little bit about how I met Lisa. We met online, and no, it wasn't the site you think it was. It was that online place called LinkedIn. You know, it's a great place to meet people, isn't it, Lisa? You meet a lot of great people there,
Yes,
don't you?
absolutely. I've met some amazing people through that platform.
Absolutely. And so Lisa and I connected on LinkedIn, and then we set up a conversation several months ago and just chatted a little bit about who we were and what we do. And I was really intrigued the first time I talked to you, Lisa. You are a brilliant woman. You have some great ideas. You have some amazing experience. And so as Chris and I began to sort of envision this new sub-series of podcasts, I really felt like there'd be a great opportunity to have you come on the show on this new series of episodes called Unpeddling and help our guests really move into this area of marketing and market research and the conversation we're going to have. But just a little bit of introduction so that you guys can get to know Lisa. Lisa is the president of a company called BottomLine. It's based in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. That is Canada for all the United States people. You know, that's the large landmass above you, bigger than America actually. That's where you're based. And Lisa and her team have been supporting challenger brands for many, many years, helping them evolve their business, create more impact on the world around them. They use a real interesting, unique process. I believe you'll talk about it maybe a little bit tonight, an impact assessment process that ultimately uncovers key insights and helps clients see what others may not see and maybe they don't even see sometimes. BottomLine is a global team of experts, and they help their clients implement what they call kick-ass strategies. And that's really the reason why I wanted to have them on the show, because anybody, Lisa, who puts in their marketing that they do kick-ass strategies, that I think we're ready to talk to them. And those kick-ass strategies are all around strong market research insights that help consistently improve conversion rates, increase sales, and profit margins. And so Lisa uses her Certified Digital Marketing Professional designation or degree at CDMP and helps brands create strategies that create impact. You've worked in Canada, you've worked globally, and that's the exciting part of this, is that this is a person we're going to talk tonight in Lisa that has a broad range of experience across cultures, across countries, and is going to bring that information and that knowledge to bear tonight. So I'm going to lead the conversation over to Chris and have him kick it off for us tonight, and then we're going to move into our conversation.
Thanks. So Lisa, I think the best way to get into our conversation tonight. So to be honest, like my background is in marketing before I've gotten into the sales side of things, and market research for me is a concept that I basically understood, but really never, I would say, actually dug into from a fundamental standpoint. I think I always knew, yes, it was good to do some research, good to understand things, but from an official standpoint, I never really got into a lot of market research. So can you kind of give me what a broad definition, like how would you define what market research is?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. And I just want to say that a lot of people, when they hear market research, they make it more complicated. All it is really just understanding the lay of the land. And so there's many things that fall under the umbrella of market research, whether that be, competitive analysis, research into who your ideal customer is, trend analysis, understanding what's going on, in the market around you. There's a ton of things that play into it, but really it's just research. It's a fancy way of saying, hey, we need to do our homework and understand what's happening out in the marketplace.
And so when you say market research, like what are some of like the avenues that you start going down to uncover market research? And I know you mentioned the term, or Tim mentioned the word in talking about what you guys do is focusing on challenger brands. So like for me, obviously challenger brands, I would say often would be smaller companies. Would you agree with that you work with, generally speaking, if they're challenger brands?
Um, That's a really great question, Chris, and I'm glad you're asking because our definition actually of a challenger brand doesn't necessarily mean whether you're big or whether you're small. It's more about kind of the grit that they bring to the table and that growth mentality. And so, they're almost. I'm not a big fan of the word underdog, but they're almost the underdog where they want to punch above their weight class. They really want to get ahead. And I can think of like really big iconic brands that, fall under that challenger brand mentality, as well as, really small brands. So yeah, for us, we're kind of focused on that mid-market, mid-sized company, but yeah, challenger to us is really that grit piece.
That's interesting because yeah, you know what? I actually for the first time a little while ago I heard the term challenger brand. I hadn't really because I've been out of the kind of in-depth marketing field for a little while. I haven't really been talked about that, and somebody mentioned challenger brands on a podcast we were doing a couple weeks ago, and it was very interesting. So why do you to talk and dig into the challenger brand side of things? Why is market research so key for challenger brands specifically? Obviously, market research is important in general, but why specifically did you guys choose to dig into it around challenger brands?
Awesome. For us, partly why we chose challenger brands is because we feel that we are one as well. And so we really kind of could see ourselves in those brands and felt like, hey, we can actually really help those people. But to your question around why is market research so important for those brands, it's kind of hard to go in and be scrappy if you don't know your opponent. And so doing that homework piece is so important because a lot of times if you're the underdog, and I know I said it's not about being small, but this is an easier way to kind of build an analogy, is that if you're an underdog and you don't have a lot of resources, whether that be time, money, doesn't matter, you've got to be more calculated in your strategy. Otherwise, you don't have that luxury of, big, huge budgets and lots of time. And, you really don't have a lot of margin for error if you fail. So that's why market research then becomes so important, is it helps you be more strategic. It really helps you understand your opponent. And you often come out on top because of it.
That's a very interesting point because one thing that I've found is that a lot of time, smaller or under-resourced companies, market research is the one thing that they struggle to see value in, I think, a lot of the time. And I think a lot of them look at the dollar value of it and say, well, why would I spend money on research when I can spend money doing stuff? But I think that's a very important point that you just put forward there, is that, again, market research should be like gold to challenger or underdog brands, because at the end of the day, yeah, they don't have finite or infinite resources like a mega global brand that can just go and, blow millions and millions of dollars. And if it doesn't work, well, they kind of try again next month type of thing. So I think that's a very interesting point around that as well. So when you are doing market research, how do you use that in the marketing side to determine marketing strategy, and then in the sales side to determine sales strategy? And I guess also, how do those mix in your opinion?
That's an awesome question. Market research feeds both sides of the coin, whether it's, marketing or sales. But I actually see, there's a huge relationship between marketing and sales. So many people see them as like these silos, but they're not. And so market research as a whole, it really should help inform what that strategy should be, whether it be marketing or sales. But then it also helps inform, what should that messaging be? And so from a marketing perspective, it helps you with your positioning. And then in a sales, situation, it really arms your sales team with what to say and how to present things, and, what does that ideal client need to hear in order to buy? So on the marketing side, it's really about the messaging and kind of getting the lead. But then when that turns into an actual prospect, or depending how you define prospect or a lead, but that person coming in then gets passed off to the sales team, and it really helps them close the sale, quicker, because they've really got that positioning nailed, and it's one cohesive message. So back to where I'm saying that, the sales and the marketing side, there's a relationship there. That's where I see it breaking down often, where, the outward facing communications are, this positioning, whatever that might be. And then, the lead comes in, and once they get past to sales, there's a huge disjunction because the message doesn't stay the same. And that's a problem. It actually breaks the trust in the brand, and it then makes the sale a whole lot harder to close. And so if the left hand isn't talking to the right hand, aka if marketing isn't talking to sales, it's a real problem in organizations.
Yeah. Lisa, and I'm really glad that you brought that up because, in the introduction to this podcast series, when Chris and I sort of introduced this idea, we talked about this thing because, so my background, my original career was in marketing and then quickly went to the sales side and leadership side of training and development and all that. Chris started in the marketing side and has found himself in the sales side. And we worked together. Chris was the director of marketing at a company and I was a consultant. And we worked together on several projects. And this became a big part of what we talked about was the nesting of sales and marketing together. And that they're not independent, they're intradependent. And it actually came from a book. We read a great book together at that time, a Harvard Business Review book called On Sales. And one of the chapters, the key chapters in that book was the power of nesting sales and marketing together as intradependent disciplines, and it's not sales versus marketing, it's sales and marketing. And so I think you're touching on a really good point in that consistency of messaging, because over the years, as I've worked with companies, I've seen that where marketing has one way of framing things, the value proposition or the way they're going to go to market, and that isn't maintained on the sales side, and you get this disconnect that does create a fundamental sense that somehow it's like a bait and switch. You've brought them in with one message or you've brought them in with one value prop, and now you're trying to push them or close them on another subset of value propositions. And there is an internal struggle that the customer gets stuck in. And you've well articulated that, because I do think that is a problem. So my question to you is, as you look at research, so how does the process, if let's just go back to the beginning. When you get a customer who says, I believe I need market research, how does the process start? Where does it start for you?
Well, and I'm glad you're asking that, because most of the time it's not the customer saying, I think I need market research.
Okay.
Usually they're coming to us saying, okay, I feel like my website isn't as good as my competitors. Can you build me a new one? Or,
Okay.
We really feel like we need to run some sort of a campaign to, drive some, new sales. And, once I start to ask some of those questions as to why, it almost always comes back to the fact that they don't have a documented strategy. They didn't really do their homework, and I'll talk in a second of how do we actually start with research. But they haven't really understood their customer. They really haven't understood their competitors. They think they have a handle of what's going on in the marketplace, but they really don't. And that just creates this perfect storm of missing the mark, and that's why they feel like they need to reinvent, whether it be website or collateral or running a campaign. And so then it's often like, okay, we need to go through an impact assessment because that's going to fix this problem for you, versus burning money on building a new website. So with research, though, people often associate market research with it's only for big brands and it costs a ton of money. I actually teach a class on how to do market research yourself. It can be free. And one big key, go talk to your sales team. They've probably got tons of things to tell you. But, the first step for us is just a bit of discovery. So understanding, who our client feels their customers are. And of course, who are their actual customers? So looking through their database. But who do they feel their competition is? What do they think is going on in the marketplace? But then it's our job to go out and actually use research to validate those things. And I can't tell you the number of times after a discovery that a client feels so sure that, this is who my ideal customer is. And we go out and start, doing even secondary analysis, and then some primary, whether that be interviews, focus groups. And the client is, not to be rude, but dead wrong. They're completely off base, and or they have a handle on who it is, but not really understanding what the real pain points are or why they buy their product or service. And then that's where the real gold comes in, because if you can understand the inner psychology of that end customer, it becomes really easy to develop a message on what's going to resonate with them. So that's kind of the beginning stages, and I could go off for the whole time we have together just on all of our process of research. The other one quick thing I want to say on research philosophy, as a firm, most people in the industry refer to our way as a little bit backwards, and so a lot of people will start with primary research first and then validate with secondary, and we do it the opposite. Primary research isn't cheap to do. Primary is things like focus groups or interviews, but it comes at a high cost. And so I personally prefer, let's go use secondary analysis, build a hypothesis from that, and then validate that with a couple of interviews versus running, a series of tons of focus groups that come at a high price tag, running 50 interviews, when if we had just done some secondary analysis and interviewed, 5 people, we probably would have gotten to the same answer. So
Well, I think as well, one of the things you said there, Lisa, like I think, market research from a sales and marketing perspective, I think oftentimes, and I started reading a new book this morning, and one of the things that he said in this book, which to me is going to change the way that I sell, it's probably one of the most profound things I've heard, in my opinion. And he said that buyers buy on emotion and justify with logic. And I think that's where market research is very interesting, because a lot of people, I think, write it off as data driven and highly logical and analytical, which it is. But I think you would agree, the goal of market research is to understand and uncover emotional buying habits that we can then leverage and use to bring the right customers on board with brands easier. And I think, too, that's something that people often overlook, and they say, well, data stuff must be, to that logical side, and that's not how people buy. And it's like, no. And I think that's where marketers and sales sometimes have a bit of disjointedness, as I think salespeople believe that marketers only, want to understand and look at the emotional side of things, but don't understand practicality. And I think on the sales side of things, marketing people don't, think sales are disconnected from the bigger picture and all this kind of stuff. But I think that's where we can bring sales and marketing people under similar ideas around why people buy. That's very powerful. So I think, again, that whole market research and getting people to buy into that is huge, in my opinion. Huge.
I couldn't agree with you more. I feel like oftentimes marketing gets this bad rep, or branding gets this bad rep, that it's all touchy-feely. And the reality is that if you've used market research to build that strategy, it's less fluffy and it's actually based on science. So, to your point about, emotion, we buy emotionally, that is 100%, 1,000% true. And IPA Databank actually did a study, it'd be a couple of years ago now, that shows that emotional based marketing sells 200% higher than rational based marketing as well.
Wow.
So if you can understand that emotion, you're leaving a tremendous amount of money on the table if you're going the logical route. I call it the peanut butter and jam sandwich. Most business owners describe, their product or service, whether that be on their website or their sales collateral, as a PB&J sandwich, where they talk about, oh, we take out this bread and it's fancy bread, and we put peanut butter on one side and jam on the other, and we put it together and we cut it with this fancy knife, and then we put it on this fancy plate and we serve it up. And the customer's like, I don't care. I'm hungry or I'm starving, and all I want to know is that if I eat this sandwich, it is going to make me full and satisfied. And so it's focusing on that kind of after effect, or that benefit statement, versus the process of how you got there. So huge mistake that people make. But if you didn't understand what motivated that end customer, it's going to be pretty hard to develop any sort of emotional message that's going to land with them and resonate.
And I think too, and Tim, I don't know, I don't know if you agree with this or not, but I think, from my experience, I think marketing people, for the most part, get that higher level value prop, understanding who the customer is and why they would buy from us, and how we craft language and things and ideas to pique their emotional interest. And I think salespeople, whether they would admit it or not, I think often lack the emotional connection to really drive that through the whole sales process. And I think that's where, and Tim, you and I have been doing a lot of work on this, is how do we bring salespeople to an understanding that it is so much more than just about the things that you're selling, but it's how you nuance what you're selling into who the customer is and why they buy and how it accomplishes their goals for them and all these types of things. Like, I think salespeople overall need to understand and do a way better job at that side of things from an emotional standpoint. I don't know. That's my perspective. What do you think, Tim?
Yeah, you know what, I would agree. I mean, I've been training and working with salespeople for 25 plus years. So, I have a little bit of experience, not a lot, but a quarter century of experience. And there's no doubt that I agree with that, Chris, and projects that you and I work with, we've identified some of those key things and bringing that together. The same principles that a marketer uses, I believe, are the same principles that a salesperson should use. And again, let me be really clear with our audience. This series is called Unpeddling. So this isn't about manipulating people to peddle your crap on them and give them stuff they don't need. That isn't what we're talking about. But it is about understanding what's happening in this transaction. There is a transaction that hopefully is going to happen, and it is called the sale. But there's a lot of stuff happening underneath this thing. And the more we understand our customer, their behavior, what's important to them, and that is very, very personalized in a lot of ways, and yet we can make some broad assumptions. And I've done over the years, Lisa, I've had the privilege. I wouldn't consider myself a market researcher, but I've had long-standing relationship with clients that have allowed me to get out and do interviews with customers. And so I've always made it my goal at some point to say, could I get into your business and talk to customers? Can I understand what the customer's really looking for? And again, I suppose that's market research. I'm figuring out, what is the customer looking for? What do they want? Is this the right customer for you? What is the customer you want? What are you trying to create? Are you looking for customers? Are you looking for partners? Are you looking for transactional? Are you looking for relational? I mean, there's so many different places you could go in this conversation. So I guess as we sort of move this conversation into some other areas, Lisa, I want to ask, as you work, so you want to nest sales and marketing together, which I love, and Chris and I are all over this for sure. Like our friend in Kentucky. What's our friend in Kentucky say, Chris? It's a good line. Like a what?
Like on a wait, no. Oh, I'm gonna forget it now. Like a cougar on a
like a cougar on a crippled chicken.
Like a cougar on a crippled chicken.
We're like a cougar on a crippled chicken, and you ought to know this. You live in Calgary. You go into the mountains, there's cougars. Like a cougar.
Right.
And for those of you listening, when we say cougar, we mean like a real cougar, like an animal cougar, okay? A cougar on a crippled chicken. And we're all over this because getting sales and marketing to come together and breathe together and move together is so critical to Chris and I. So as you work downstream in businesses, do you find you get an opportunity to work with sales and marketing? Is the initial way in through marketing, and then you bring them the light of this connectivity, or how does that look like for you, Lisa?
Great question. I would say often it's the marketing team first. So usually, like through an impact assessment, it's usually the leadership team. So it'll be the CEO, the CMO, often the VP of Ops, and then usually we'll have the VP of Sales there. I prefer to have whoever's leading the sales team, part of the process. And it's always, the discovery is always the most interesting because you get to see what's that dynamic actually like on their team. And unfortunately, more often than not, usually the CMO and the VP of sales are at each other's throats. And what's sad about that is that they could actually help each other so much. But that's a story for another day. But as we kind of go down that path of the impact assessment, and we've been able to then, nail their positioning, help them build their plan, and we're in that discussion around, okay, well, what would make, you leading the sales team, what would make your life easier? You leading the marketing team, what would make your life easier? We actually start to build out, the plan around some of those things. So if the sales team's saying, for an example, marketing is just sending us, really unqualified, crappy leads, we need the leads to be, more qualified. And we also, we need some better sales collateral because, these brochures suck or whatever the case may be. And then marketing might be saying, okay, well, we actually need better feedback from the sales team because you guys actually have been telling us that, these presentation decks are great. So we get that discussion going and then really kind of narrow it down to, okay, what would be the low-hanging fruit for these guys? What would make their lives easier? And then we make sure, back to that messaging piece, make sure that the brand is and the message is consistent throughout anything that's being created so that when, marketing's rolling out a campaign, it's the same message as what sales is delivering once, a lead comes in and they're sitting down. And I loved what you said about, we're not trying to peddle stuff to people. If we've done a good job of really understanding what the customer sees value in, we're no longer peddling stuff. We're actually making that end customer's life easier and better. I'm sure you're going to ask me about unpeddling, but that's kind of my definition is, how are you going to create good value for that end customer so that you're not just selling them another widget, that it actually makes their life easier and better? Two really key things.
I think that's a very good point. And like, yeah, if you're doing market research properly and you're doing it for the right reasons, like I think I saw something today on LinkedIn that I think Mike Weinberg, a sales guru, posted, and he was saying, like, even framing prospecting, it's like if we frame prospecting, marketing, sales, whatever we're doing in the light of that we're bugging people and we're interrupting their day, we have it all wrong from the start. Like I think what you're saying, Lisa, market research helps actually drive where we can add the most value with the least amount of resistance. And I think that's a very important thing. Is it's not emotional manipulation, it's not anything like that. It's actually getting to the root so that we can help the right people quicker and easier for the right reasons so that we all win together. And I think, again, that's such a very important aspect of sales and marketing, and everything we've talked about on this Unpeddling series is that it's not about manipulation in any way, shape, or form. It's about finding the right people in the right way that we can add the most value to, because that's going to have, it's not going to have a ton of resistance in trying to build those relationships. So, I think for me, what I'm hearing you say, Lisa, is, market research is, it almost gives us the grease in the process a little bit to kind of get everything working better and smoothing things out and getting alignment. I think I've never really thought of market research as something that gains alignment and gives people, gets people on the same page, but it absolutely is. So I think that's a very interesting perspective for sure.
How did you get involved in this? Like, do you wake up one day and say, this is my business, this is what I want to do? I mean, how do you find your way into this anyways? I'd be interested in just understanding how you got here.
I'd be happy to share, and I'm smirking because it's actually kind of funny. So out of university, I always, when I would take on a project, and it didn't matter whether it was a consulting gig or whether I was helping write some copy, because at the beginning of my career, I was kind of jack of all trades. And I would always go and do my homework first. That was what I did. And I kind of had this process that I would go through. And I just had made this assumption that every marketer did it that way, that everybody, saw market research in the same way that I did. And I lived like that for quite a few years before I kind of woke up and realized that is so not the case at all. Most marketers are more focused on, the tactical side of things, which is, writing copy or managing social media or whatever that looks like for them, but they really don't do that due diligence piece. That's not common in my industry. And when I kind of found that out, I was kind of this like, like, how is everybody not doing it this way? So I sort of fell into it. At the beginning of starting BottomLine, that again was how I operated. We'd take on a project and I would go and do my homework. We'd put out some great work and they'd refer us somebody else, and we kind of went along like that for several years. And then one day I woke up and it was like, we're not charging for this homework piece. Why are we doing this for free? Like, we're adding a ridiculous amount of value. And so that was kind of where impact assessments were born, as we kind of said, okay, like, all of these pieces that we are doing are pretty much the same for all of our clients, so it should be a formalized process. And so that's where it is today.
Before you mentioned kind of primary and secondary research. So as you said, primary research would be things that I can't think a lot of us kind of go to when we hear market research, focus groups, studies, that kind of stuff. So what would you describe secondary research as? Like what kind of things are involved in that?
Great question. Really, secondary is kind of the everything else. So anything you can find on the web, other studies that have been published, statistical data like census, and really anything that comes from a source that's already out there is kind of how I define secondary. And then primary, an easy way to think about it is straight from the horse's mouth. So if you have to talk to somebody in an interview to gather that information, that would be, firsthand or primary research data.
And do you find generally that
So when you look at,
do you find that
yeah, we're going to keep interrupting each other. You go
Sorry.
ahead, Chris.
do you find that secondary and primary research often line up with each other?
Oh, not always. And that is also why we start with secondary first, narrow to that hypothesis, and then validate with primary. I personally feel that there is no substitute for primary research. Hearing straight from the horse's mouth is always best. I've been challenged on that many times in my career, and I will die on that hill all day long. And so, yeah, no, it does not always line up. So sometimes you'll pull, let's say we're working on a project in the, energy drink space, and we look at, what are all the studies that Harvard Medical Journal has published on the use of caffeine in, entrepreneur success, or whatever that looks like. And so you'll drill down to a bit of a hypothesis, and then you'll actually go out and run some interviews and go, whoa, we were wrong. But what that does, though, is it points you in a different direction, which is not always a bad thing. It can then give you the ability to say, okay, we need to go and do some more secondary research in this particular area because we found we were wrong. So it's kind of this, like, I don't want to say a game of snake and ladders, because there is a method to the madness, but it kind of points you in different directions, and you have to follow that path, if you will.
It's interesting conversation, because I think a lot of people, like Chris said earlier, think that market research is well beyond their ability, like it's too big, too expensive, or whatever. So let me ask you, what is the simplest kind of market research that I could do that you would believe would be the most helpful to me? So if, let's say I'm a small business and I'm not sure yet if I can hire a company to do it. As you said, a lot of it can be for free. But let's say that's who I am for a second. Then we'll go to a different kind of company. But let's say I'm a small company and I'm not sure how this works. What's the simplest, most cost-effective research that I could do that, in your experience, would give me the best result to leverage from?
Such a great question. There are so many free tools that are available. So the first one that I always say, talk to your customers. That is free. It is easy to do. Draft up, 2-3 questions that you would want to ask them. And this is what's important, is make sure that you're consistently asking the same questions in each conversation. So it's not like I talked to client A and I asked these questions, and then I talked to client B and I asked a totally separate set of questions, because now your data is not congruent. But talk to your customers. That's an easy one. Build yourself a list of who your competitors are and go look at their websites. Go take a look at what they're doing for marketing, and just try to get a peek into what their customer journey is like in comparison to yours. Those are probably two of the easiest free things that you can do. The other tool that I love, Google Analytics. go and take a look at the demographics hitting your website. Sure, that's probably not going to give you a full psychographical profile, but it's going to give you a pretty decent understanding of, what do people engage with? What do they care about? What do they not care about? Go look at some Reddit forums, and see what are people griping about in relation to your product or your service. What are some new use cases? So if you sell a product, let's say you sell, I don't know, hats, are people using those hats for something else? Like, I don't know, covering the end of their golf clubs. I'm making this up, but my point is often you'll go skim some Reddit forums and find totally new use cases for your product that you had no idea even existed, that people are like, oh, this works so well for X.
Interesting.
So,
So, as it relates to the interviews, is it best? So, if let's say I'm going to decide I'm going to do some interviews, and I do craft some really good questions, and they're the same questions. In your experience, is it best for me to do personal interviews, human to human, or is it best for me to seek that by email and get people to feedback? How do I just if I take those two approaches from a data perspective, what gives me a better experience and result? The human asking human across a table, or do I do it digitally?
definitely the human.
Okay.
You're just going to get more information than what people will type out in an email. But the other thing here that's a good consideration, I mean, if you are a solopreneur, well, you have no choice. It is you and you only, which means you got to do the interviews. But I always recommend, when you're doing any level of market research, is if you can have somebody who does not have day-to-day interaction with that customer, have them do your interview for you. So don't have, that client or that customer's account manager do the interview, because it's going to be a little bit biased information that you get.
Right. Right. Yeah, good point. Good point. No, that's a good point. And I've had the privilege of sitting in front of a lot of customers over the years conducting these kind of interviews, and it is gold that you find. There's no doubt. And I've been trusted by many clients over the years to go out and have these conversations on their behalf, and that's a trusted position. As you know, Lisa, when a company engages you and your team, and you go out on their behalf and start seeking opinion, that's a vulnerable place. It's a place where you're going to find out the good, the bad, the ugly, and the things they don't want to know or need to know. And so it is a trusted place. And I suppose more than anything, to be hired or chosen as a company that's going to engage like you do with companies, it is ultimately a transaction of trust that they place in you when they decide to hire you and your team, because they're going to find out some things they may like, and they may find out some things, frankly, they dislike really tremendously. And so, you get placed in a trusted position when people hire you and your team. What does that look like for you? So when you take that trust, because it is a transaction of trust that happens, as you take that and you begin to get in this world for them, what is that? How does it feel when you're presenting back data that is going to be difficult for the client to synthesize? What does that look like?
Yeah, I'm happy to share. I would say on most of our engagements, through an impact assessment, there is at least one piece of information that they learn that is uncomfortable. And we really have to be kind in the delivery. That's just really part of our values. But more importantly, we have to be a leader. And what that means is not being afraid to tell the client, hey, this is what we've found, and here's why this is, bad for your business. But then it's very important that we have a solution for okay, we've presented, here's this bad thing, but here's what we can do to fix that. And I do find that, after the dust settles or that initial shock is over, and we kind of come with here is a solution to that problem, it usually, well, almost always further builds the trust, because and that's something where we have actually gone back and asked our customers for feedback, and they have said one of the things we appreciated so much about working with BottomLine is that you were not afraid to tell us no, and you also weren't afraid to deliver bad news, but more importantly, after you delivered it, you had a solution for us that made us feel like you had our back, instead of just saying, hey, we found this thing, it really sucks, so you're gonna have to figure it out. So that trust is an ongoing thing, and it, yes, absolutely, at the beginning of those engagements that trust has to be built, but I would say that is throughout all of our client relationships. You continually have to be building that trust, but also continually adding value.
I have one more question for you, and then I'm going to turn it back to Chris. And then when Chris is finished asking his questions, I'll come back to you with a couple final ones. But so let me ask you a quick question. So when you get into that discussion with the customer, and you're out on their behalf doing interviews, so I know sometimes when I've done some of these kind of small research projects, and I'm not an expert in any way, I'm a hack when it comes to these things, but I get asked to do them because I get embedded fairly in relationships over the years that I work with clients. But there's always this question: should I pay the customer for sitting down? Should I give them a gift? Should I incentivize them or not? Is that good practice, bad practice? Does it skew the process in your experience? Because that's a question I often get from my customers. And we say, well, should we give them a thank you gift for sitting down with us? And frankly, I don't have enough knowledge to know, does that materially impact the process in any way? So I'd like to get your expert thought on that, Lisa.
It can, and I typically don't recommend it, but that's also partly based on just bottom line philosophy and how we build relationships. If I have to pay you for every time that we want to have a conversation or sit down, it now gets back, and this kind of plays into the unpeddling theme a little bit, is that kind of then brings the relationship back to this like exchange of just time for money. And I believe that relationships are built on things much stronger than time and money. And so, to offer up, whether it's, here's some money for your time, or here's a gift for your time, it starts to tread into that territory for me. So I typically don't recommend it. I think that there's nothing wrong with, after doing the interview, if the client gave you really good feedback, then maybe you send a little something as a thank you for, your feedback. But most often, just a simple thank you goes a long way, because if the relationship is strong, it doesn't really need that extra bit. And to the question around, does it skew the data? I would argue absolutely, because there's a psychological shift that happens when we get back to that exchange of time for money too. So.
Thank you, by the way. It's something I've always wanted to get expert advice on, and Lisa, you've given it to me today. So now
Well,
I can say to my clients, an expert told me you should not do it that way. So that's what I'm going to say this, and then I'll tell them who you are after that. Excellent.
Well, thank you, Tim.
Chris, what are the questions you got for Lisa today? This is a great conversation. And again, we really appreciate your time. And if you're listening in today, thanks for giving us your time as we just sort of braille out this conversation and muse ourselves way through this big idea of market research and understanding our customers.
I don't have any more questions. I do have one more observation that I think is very important to draw out. And when, Lisa, you were talking about the process of presenting research to your clients that have asked you for something, and having to deliver that bad news, and or something they didn't necessarily know, that is unsettling for them to have to hear. I think the interesting thing is, because of the type of business that you guys are, you uncover, present, and then solve. And I think, that's a very important principle that I think we all should take away, that as salespeople, as marketing people, if we want to unpeddle ourselves and go above and beyond, being able to uncover information in whatever way, whether it's market research or sales, working with our customers or whatever, being able to properly uncover information, being able to present good and bad news, and then coming alongside people with a solution to that. I think in whatever aspect you're talking about. That's a very powerful thing to be able to do. And as you said, there's kind of a principle of doing your homework as the baseline of that, whether you call it market research or, just what we should be doing to make sure that we're prepared, whatever. But I think that's I really appreciated that comment that you said there. I think that's a very important thing for us to remember.
Thank you.
No, it's powerful. So, Lisa, let me ask you. So, if somebody wants to hunt you down and find you and find your team, how do they do that?
Well, I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, as we were saying earlier. So
Yes, you
definitely can
are.
reach out
Yes.
definitely reach out on LinkedIn. Or I'm a pretty open book. If you want to send me an email, just lisa@wearebottomline.com or wearebottomline.com. Visit us at our website too.
Okay, and listen, if you're listening in today and you're a small company and you can't figure it out, and you need some help, reach out to Lisa. She'll help you. I've been after I originally connected with you, Lisa. I've been following you and just reading your posts and connecting. You are a person who's very generous with your expertise, with your time. And I think that says a lot about you, and I'm sure it says a lot about your whole team that you've put together in this experience that at BottomLine. And so, if you're a small company and you're looking for some help, I think Lisa and her team could be a great asset to you. If you're a big company and you need some help, you need some people who are clear thinkers, practical in nature, solidly focused on delivering results. I think you've found people that you could work with as well. So regardless of the size of your organization, I believe Lisa and her team have something that they can offer you. And I say that primarily, Lisa, because of the quality of what you've communicated today. I mean, you've talked about relationship, you've talked about trust, you've talked about integrity, you've talked about bringing real value, and you've done it in a way that isn't super heady in the sense that it's confusing everybody, and now all of a sudden we need you, Lisa, because we're so confused because this thing is so big. You've actually articulated in a way that really makes simple sense, and that often for me is the sniff test that there's credibility and integrity and validity in what this person's saying. And so I really appreciate that. Because I've met a lot of people over the years who try to hawk their service. And what I love about the conversation with you, Lisa, is that is not the kind of person that you are, and clearly not the kind of organization that you've created. And that has a lot of sway for me. And so I want to point that out and want to say that I really appreciate about just the way that you've approached the conversation tonight, because you've really unpacked it in a way that makes it accessible to everyone. And that's a real gift, Lisa, because I think a lot of times people want to baffle people with their knowledge to the point where we all say, well, we have to talk to her because it's so confusing. But Lisa, I love your simple, powerful, practical approach to this. It's really, really powerful.
Thank you for the kind words, Tim. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, it's a gift for sure. So let me ask you, as we finish up, here's a question that we always like to ask our guests. This podcast is called UNCOMMODiFiED. The subset of series of episodes that we're doing is Unpeddling. It's all about moving in to this world of sales and marketing, but the same principle applies. A lot of the stuff that we get out there and even the service that you provide can become a commodity. I can get the same thing elsewhere. And so as you look at this idea of uncommodifying, standing out and being different for yourself, Lisa, and for your company, what is standing out in the market that you work in? What is being different and standing out look for you on a practical basis in your personal life, in your work life? How do I know when you're being your most unique, uncommodified self? What are you doing in those moments, do you think?
Oh, it's such an excellent question. I have to be honest, when we first spoke, you asked me a bit about that, and I've really pondered leading up to this point. And I think for me, it's actually really simple, and it comes back to that value piece. If I'm not adding value back, whether that's in a conversation, whether I'm a keynote at a conference, whether I'm on a podcast, or I'm writing a post on LinkedIn, if I'm not adding value for the people that are either reading or listening to me, I'm just peddling something. So I really feel like that's always my focus, is how do I add value back to that other person? And I believe that That's just the way our world works, that if you add that value, it'll come back to you in some way, shape, or form one day. And so that's kind of my approach and what I think about.
You know what I love that answer, and it doesn't surprise me based on my little bit of interaction with you, but it doesn't surprise me at all, and I appreciate that. So listen, as we finish up, if you were going to challenge our listeners in this area of market research and data analysis and customer connection and understanding customer, what's the one piece of advice as we finish today that you would want to challenge them with, as just for you to give them an opportunity to frame what we've said today?
I think the one thing I'd encourage everyone to do is take that step back and really take a look at your business holistically, and be honest with yourself on, have I really done that legwork or that homework to gather some of the information or the data that we've talked about today, and put that into my strategy. And if the answer is no, that's okay. You're not alone. So many people answer no to that question. But spend some time doing that. I think you will be surprised at the ROI you get on the time that you've actually spent doing those activities. I know that we've talked a little bit about, market research costing a lot and it's only for the big boys. And the reality is it becomes more important for those smaller brands. So that's what I challenge you to do. Go back to the basics, do your homework, and use that information to help you develop your strategy moving forward.
Awesome. That's great advice. And so listen, as we finish up today, again, I want to say to our listeners, listen, if you've got a business and you're thinking about these things, think about what Lisa said, think about the questions we've asked, and ask, can I use this in my business? Even if you're not a business owner, and maybe it has nothing to do with business. Maybe you're listening in and you're not really a business owner. There's application of this in your world too, because so much of this is, do we make assumptions about people that we're interacting with? Are we assuming that we're, delivering value? I mean, as we're talking, Lisa, I'm thinking about my own relationships. I assume that I know what my people need from me, but am I always right? Maybe I just need to ask them. Maybe I need to just ask better questions and really understand the value that I'm bringing. So whether it's a customer relationship or a human relationship that is outside of customers, the same is true. The assumptions we make can kill us. Having real data and the truth will ultimately set us free and help us really find our way. And so listen, as you unpeddle and apply this in your life, do me a favor, email me at tim@theuncommodified.com, or connect with Chris and I on social media, connect with Lisa on social media, and let us know how you're unpacking and unpeddling all of this into your real world, how you're applying this and ultimately making it work for the advantage of yourself, your customers, your business, your life. Thanks for listening, and have a great day.